Hello, friend. Thanks for joining me for another book chat. Today, let's spend some time with Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, some historical fiction originally published back in 2009. This book actually picked up the Booker Prize that year, the Man Booker Prize. So, Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel has been on my reading list for quite some time for two main reasons. Number one, I really love the history of this era. This is the era of Henry VIII, the Tudor era of England, and I think this era is just really fascinating. And then secondly, it was been recommended to me multiple times. This may be my most recommended book on my channel that I've gotten recommends for. So I've had it on my reading radar for quite some time and actually thought I might get it to it last year but did not. So this year is definitely my year for Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. So what is this about? I mentioned that it's historical fiction and it's set during the time of Henry VIII. It's seen through the perspective, the story's told through the perspective of Thomas Cromwell, who is our main sort of, I guess you could say, character in this book. The Thomas Cromwell, as described in the book, was the son of a blacksmith, so he was a commoner. And at a really early age, he had this really abusive father, and at a really early age he ran away from home and ran away to France and then wandered around the continent of Europe, learning all the languages, the major languages of Europe. He was a very intelligent person with supposedly with a fantastic memory, and then he returns back to England. So the book actually begins in 1500 when he's about to run away. So we get this little brief glimpse of him as a young boy, but then most of the action of the book actually takes place during the period of time when Henry VIII is wanting to annul his marriage with his wife Catherine of Aragon, he's been married to for 20 years, but with whom he has been unable to produce a son, which is what he's really wanting. He's also very smitten with Anne Boleyn. So he's at this period in this book that's covered in this book. This is the period where Henry is trying to negotiate the annulment of his marriage to Catherine so that he can marry Anne Boleyn, among other things that we're going to talk about as well. As the book kind of opens, Thomas Cromwell is really the loyal assistant of Cardinal Wolsey, who's really the most powerful, the last of the great, I think, powerful cardinals of England. And Cardinal Wolsey, though, gets caught up in this drama. So Henry's wanting to annul the marriage with Catherine, and this is the period of time when the Catholic Church is still supreme in Europe. He needs the permission of the Pope in order to do that. He is the monarch of England, and so he would not have. He needs to have that legitimacy. He can't just necessarily do what he wants. He has to do it through some sort of legal and socially acceptable means. Well, this is opposed by the Pope. It's opposed by the rest of Catholic Europe, and it's opposed by Queen Catherine and her supporters among the nobility within England, which is substantial. And so we actually have this political situation that Thomas Cromwell really then ultimately steps into, because this tumult ultimately brings about the end of Cardinal Wolsey. And so Thomas Cromwell was able to step into that place. And so I think that was one of my key takeaways about the book, was just how this commoner, Thomas Cromwell, was able to actually get into this position of great power among the, bypassing all the nobility that surrounded the king at the time. So that was really quite amazing. So that's the general gist of the story. I don't want to it's historical fiction, so we already know how this is going to end, right? We already know that King Henry VIII is going to actually be able to annul the marriage of Catherine of Aragon, and he does this by pulling England out of the Catholic Church, and so establishing then the Church of England. I'm going to talk more about that, though, in detail here in a bit, about the Reformation that was going on at the time. But we know how it ends. We know he marries Anne Boleyn ultimately, and Anne Boleyn is the mother of Elizabeth. But the way that this story is told is very immersive in Wolf Hall. I had heard great things about it, and so I was really curious how I was gonna experience it, and I had heard many times how immersive it was, and yes, it was a very compelling story, even though the history is quite familiar to us. Seeing it told through these characters, the way these characters were brought to life, was really an enjoyable experience. So some thoughts and themes about the book. The first one that kind of came to mind was how history could turn out differently. How history could turn out differently based on just someone's decision. If someone makes some decision, especially these people in power, but actually all of us ultimately, right? History can turn out different. And there's a quote about this that I thought was really interesting, and it says, it's about Catherine, Queen Catherine of Aragon. It says, look, if Catherine were to withdraw her suit from Rome, if she were to submit to judgment of her case in England, or if the Pope were to concede to the king's wishes, then all this, everything you've said, it wouldn't happen. So, they're saying here, if Catherine were just to withdraw her opposition, or if the Pope were to concede to Henry's request to annul the marriage. And the annulment of the marriage is also very interesting. I won't go into that here, but it's talked about in the book at detail, like what is the grounds for that. Catherine was married to Henry's brother before him, actually, who his brother passed away. And so there's some details there that they're trying to finagle to say ultimately that Henry and Catherine's marriage was not legitimate. And so this had consequences, though, for Princess Mary, who then would be considered illegitimate and not in the line of royal succession, right? So it had a lot of ramifications, but just how things can turn out differently, right? But this thing about the Reformation and England becoming Protestant and establishing the Church of England, I think as I've thought of history, it's very common, I think, in history, when you're reading history or understanding history, to do these shortcuts. And you think, oh, England's Protestant because of this, right? Because Henry VIII wanted to annul his marriage with Catherine. And Mary Anne Boleyn. So, that's why that's a shortcut, right? That's a mental shortcut. It's a much bigger picture than that. And this is actually explained really quite well in the book here about the whole sort of atmosphere of Reformation that was going on in Europe at the time. Martin Luther had nailed those theses that kicked off the Reformation in 1517. So where we are in that period right now, we're in the 1520s. We're in like 1525. So it's been a few years. But that has had a social and religious upheaval has resulted in that, and there's a quote here from Hans Holbein, who is a famous portrait artist of the era, that the famous portrait of Henry VIII that you've seen, and he did Thomas More, he did Thomas Cromwell even. So he's a character in the book, actually. And he's telling Thomas Cromwell about his experience in Switzerland, and he says, Hans grunts, downs his cup of wine, and talks about what he's left behind. Talk about Basel. About the Swiss cantons and cities, riots and pitched battles, images, not images, statues, not statues. It is the body of God. It is not the body of God. It is sort of the body of God. It is his blood. It is not his blood. Priests may marry. They may not. There are 7 sacraments. There are 3. And on and on. There's these sort of questions that the Reformation kicked off, have just been reverberating through Europe and through England. And so there's a lot of dissidence in England as far as there's an English language Bible now. This is prohibited. There's people who study that and have their own ideas about religion now. So it's really a new world as far as Christian thinking of this time. And that sort of impact in England is part of the greater story of the Reformation, that Henry comes along right at this time and has this sort of altercation with the Pope about what he wants to do for his own succession. You know, that impact of the printed Bible in English is also illustrated in the book really, really well and talked about quite a bit. There's a quote here about that too, and it says, "As the word of God spreads, the people's eyes are open to new truths. Until now, like Helen Barr is one of the characters in the book, they knew Noah and the flood, but not St. Paul. They could count over the sorrows of our Blessed Mother and say how the damned are carried down to hell, but they did not know the manifold miracles and sayings of Christ." Because in Catholicism, you went to the Mass and the priest, you didn't actually read the Bible yourself. It was in Latin, wasn't in your language, and so the people of the time, the common people, didn't really know the details that were in the Bible until it became available in English. And with the rise of literacy, then that was able to spread. And, of course, that causes a lot of social upheaval. I thought that was just a really cool part of the book and how that's illustrated in the book. This book really brings to life a lot of characters, though, from history. There's Thomas More, Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII, of course, the different nobles like the Seymours. The Seymours are actually Jane Seymour, who was eventually going to become Henry VIII's next wife. That's the name. Wolf Hall is the name of the home of the Seymour family, so Jane Seymour's family. But then, other people, like common people that come and go within Thomas Cromwell's household. He was always taking in people in the book, like these young men he would find kind of on the street, basically, and like take them in and give them kind of a job and really apprentice them into other things then. Young women, too, he met and brought them into his household and gave them sort of positions of, different tasks to do, like cooks or whatever, that were in need. And then he had his own family, extended family, nieces, nephews. He had one son. His wife had passed away earlier. His sisters and brother-in-laws, and so it was a big household. The household was almost like a little town in and of itself, it seems like, and that part was really cool too. Okay, before I run out of time, I'm going to close with this chat from John Frith, who was a scholar burned for heresy in the book, and this quote comes from a conversation he is having about basically the Reformation, the new Christianity that's emerging, and this is between Cromwell and Frith, and Cromwell says, "They will burn you." And Frith says, "And you think I cannot bear the pain? You are right, I cannot. But they will give me no choice. As More says, it hardly makes a man a hero to agree to stand and burn once he is chained to a stake. I have written books, and I cannot unwrite them. I cannot unbelieve what I believe. I cannot unlive my life." I just love that quote. I think it is so cool. I have written books, I can't unwrite them. I can't undo your life once you've done it. And so he's not going to try to go back and say he didn't do what he did, and he's going to face the consequences of that, which were very dire. There's heretics in here, dissidents, commoners, there's other noble families. The personalities really all come through really well. It's just a lot of fun to read. I am going to read the next one in this series called Bring Up the Bodies, I believe. I will probably go ahead and read that yet to this year, just because I enjoyed this one so much. So I will leave the chat there. My next chat is going to be some art history. 12 Caesars by Mary Beard. This was really better than I expected, and I have finished it already, so I will have a chat on this coming up really soon. Until next time, take care.